Welcome everybody to this session called A New Song on Church Choirs. And I'm Jonathan Startup, I'm one of the ABCD trustees, and it's a great pleasure to welcome a panel covering, I would say, a very wide spectrum of church music. So we have Hugh Morris, who's director of the Royal School of Church Music, Martin Seymour, who's director of music at Romsey. Is it Romsey or Rumsey, should I say?
Romsey, definitely.
It is Romsey,
although the locals may differ.
Director of music at Romsey Abbey. Emma Trounson, who's director of music at All Saints with Holy Trinity Parish Church in Loughborough. Roy Rashbrook, Vicars Choral at St Paul's Cathedral, and Tricia Rees-Jones, who's music director in it says here, a rural parish in the southwest, which is apparently very hard to find. So welcome, everybody. What we're going to do is, this is obviously going to be very much, well, I hope it will be very much an interactive session because other people will want to share their experiences or raise points or ask questions. What I'm going to do is ask the panel, and as there are 5 of them, just to give a sort of short 5 minutes or so introduction to say a little bit about how things have been for them or their choirs the last year or so, how things are restarting and going now, what sort of precautions are still in place, and how they've found whether there's been any kind of shift in the environment that they've noticed while they've been away, as it were. As we know that some churches have, for better or worse, taken the opportunity to make, in some cases, quite radical changes. So that's going to be the format. Not entirely at random, but I'm going to ask, call on people in order, and that should take up about the first half of the session, and then we'll open it up to questions and comments, and we'll take it from there. So without more ado, I would like Hugh, oh yes, still there, good. Yes, I'm slightly worried about this after. Hugh, if you'd like to start with your introduction and saying also a little bit perhaps about what the RSCM's role has been in sort of keeping things going and getting started again.
Absolutely, and thank you, Jonathan, and good afternoon to everybody. And I'm sorry if my connection goes a bit funny. I've had to, at the last minute, move to a different computer in a different room. So the RSCM, of course, has church music at its very core of what it's about, because that is our entire mission, is about supporting church music and particularly the training associated with it. The pandemic and all that's created has given the RSCM a slightly different focus from where it had been pre-pandemic, and we've been in a position where we've been able to, what I hope has been really, and certainly we've had such positive feedback for being a source of help and support, and that's taken all sorts of forms, endlessly evolving advice and guidance, including practical help that we hope that churches have been able to make use of. And if that's still of interest to you, our website still has COVID guidance. I can just show you the screen of that in a moment. I think it's one of the things that we've also been able to move forward and take the advantage of all that digital opportunity. And we've had a whole load of webinars and teaching sessions and so forth, and some of those have been aimed at choir members, and some of them have been aimed at the people who run choirs, and of course also with our ministerial colleagues. And one thing that we have found, and I know of course musical activities online have their upsides and their less upsides, but we've over the last sort of, well, however long it's been, we've run a few sort of large-scale online participative, I have to say that word slowly, services, where by issuing all the resources to people in advance and then putting together live acts of worship that people join in with all of the pacts, we've been able to draw several thousand people together simultaneously. And there is a power in that, knowing that you're not alone. Wherever you are, you're not alone. We did initially run things like Sunday self-service for people who couldn't connect with their own churches, and hymn for the day and things. But of course, as people have become tech savvy in their own right, there's no need for some of those things, so we've withdrawn them because they're being done at a more local level, and we've been rethinking about other possibilities. And so, from our point of view, that's really then thinking positively about the possibilities that unfold moving forwards. And actually, I think one of the critical things at this time is encouraging people as you said, Jonathan, some churches have had great changes of what have been going on. Some people have just reverted to where they were. The main thing, it seems to me and or us, is that having the right conversations between the right groups of people in connected with your church is utterly critical. There is the risk, and it is, of course, it's not a given, it's a risk, that you can end up in a scenario with churches are quite complicated and, dare I say, often political beings, that one person simply says, "Oh, we're not going to do it," or "It's dangerous," from no point of view other than that's perhaps their own personal preference and their own kind of set of mindset. And actually, it's better to get the right group of people around the table thinking about what it actually is meant, because, of course, the easiest thing is to say, "No, we're not going to do it." And we have to think positively about what can be done. I think it's particularly, of course, it's interesting, that my local parish church, the choir goes back and just it may be a year and a half since we last sang choral evensong, but we remember what to do, and within a few minutes it's kind of like, well, some kind of normality is resumed. It's a much harder landscape for the people who've got children involved in their choirs, because a year and a half in the life of a children's choir, especially if you've got any boys involved, is quite radically a long time, and there are great concerns about that, which is one of the reasons. And I'm speaking quickly to give others their chance, Jonathan. You may have seen that we've set up International Chorus today, which is in a couple of weeks' time, September the 19th, deliberately a Sunday, and that's about celebrating the role of choristers. You can find I can show you. In fact, am I allowed to share screen? Will that work? Hopefully it will, and let's see if it works.
Should be okay. Yeah.
So if I switch to this, can you see International Choristers there on the screen, Jonathan?
Yep.
Yeah, so there's a whole page here about, and we'd encourage everybody to get involved with this. So to a greater or lesser extent, and it's got a whole load of things about some events that we're doing across the country, how you can put on something yourself, and critically, sharing stories about people, what it's meant to them to be a chorister. And so there's this sort of wall of stories that people can, hopefully it'll load, that you can submit your own experiences of what you gain from being in the choir. And we'd encourage anybody to, the website makes it very clear how you can put in your own story, because actually that's a really good sort of vehicle for showing people the value of it. And just to set it in context, so we're looking forwards now about how we could be helping churches into the future. We've launched a new education plan, which will sort of shape up the way that we do that. And there's lots of practical sessions that are going to be delivered by our local areas from later this year and into 2022 and beyond. And there are some new key new products that we've got coming. There's a few printed ones, and I'm going to just hold up 2 copies briefly. One of which is that for anyone thinking about Christmas, never too soon to think about Christmas, this book of carols for sopranos, altos and men. I'm sorry, the blur background, because I moved into a room which wasn't prepared for cinematic presentation. Anyway, the RSCM carols for sopranos, altos and men is proving very appreciative because it's quite flexible. And the second thing is that anybody who runs a choir and is thinking about, well, how can I do what I'm doing? The Voice for Life Guide to Choir Training book is also very genuinely helpful. But the two key things that people might also be pleased to hear is coming to help churches moving forward is a new product called Impact, which we're very excited about, which helps join churches with schools, and that's coming and should be launched, we hope, in November. And also the Voice for Life chorister training program, there's a digital version, which is the first level of which is currently in testing, and we're excited about that too. And the last thing I'm going to say before, because obviously there's plenty more you can do, is that others would like to say, is as an example about how people are sort of wanting to mark this sort of resuming. One of our members got in touch about a piece that he'd written for the resumption of music in church. And we ended up saying, well, okay, we'll put a little news piece about it in our magazine, which landed on people's doormats a couple of days ago. And he sent me an email in the last hour, actually, saying, oh, thank you so much for putting the news piece in. And I've already had some churches contacting me about, because he's prepared rehearsal tracks and stuff for all this stuff, for the piece, to engage with that. So there is an appetite for kind of marking the occasion. And so what I might do is put in the chat the links to a couple of things so that people can find those, including we continue to update our guidance as whenever it might be. But it's sort of, we've tried to put in the latest one about the setting up the conversations thing.
Yeah.
I've talked enough, Jonathan, and I've talked quickly, so I'll stop and breathe and pass to someone else for a minute.
That's great, thank you. And if well, some of the, as Carol pointed out, some of the links are already available in the resources on the repertoire resources page. But if you want to put some of those links in the chat, that would be great as well. Okay, well, thank you for that, Hugh. Moving swiftly on, I'd like to invite Emma next to say something from the perspective of a parish church, really. So thank you, Emma.
So I'm Director of Mission Through Music at All Saints with Holy Trinity Parish Church in Loughborough. And I've been in that role for 2.5 years, but I've been running the children's choir through a job that I had at Leicester Cathedral as a choral director for many years before that. All Saints is an inclusive church and it's got a vibrant choral tradition. We've got an adult choir, which is a robed SATB choir, and also a children's choir, and both choirs are non-auditioned and they rehearse weekly and they sing regularly for Sunday communion and some special evensong services. We have an all-age music group, so singers and instrumentalists, which supports our celebration communion, which is like our family service. And we also have a contemporary collective, so once a month we give the choir a little bit of a break and we have some more contemporary worship music, more kind of on the folky side of things. And that's actually led by a local music teacher, and that's more selective as well. But neither of the choirs or the all-age music group are auditioned, so it's as inclusive as it can be. And we also have a team who leads Teze as singers and instrumentalists, and we have a pool of organists, amateur and professional, but primarily led by a professional principal organist, and we have an organ scholar position as well. So as part of my job, I also ran pre-pandemic mostly outreach projects with people from the local community. So partnering with other organisations to offer singing opportunities in local schools, care homes, community centres. And also pre-lockdown, I ran a weekly singing group called Soundbites at the Falcon Centre, which is a kind of a drop-in centre and accommodation for homeless and vulnerably housed people in Loughborough. So my job at All Saints is a part-time role, so I am also a freelancer, so I kind of can answer, your question. I can see both sides from the two camps really. I have 2 Leicester community choirs. I run the Sound Cafe choir in Leicester for homeless and vulnerable adults as well, and I also have an auditioned small female vocal ensemble called Cora, which is Leicestershire based, and I'm a soprano soloist and choral singer, and alongside all of that I look after my 9-month-old little boy. Yes, how I have time to do that, I don't know. I can take him to church, so that helps. So I take him with me and he comes and helps with all the actions in the family service. So the last 18 months for our choir as well, I'm sure it's quite similar to some of your experiences. We had weekly Zoom rehearsals. We sort of got on top of that quite soon into the lockdown. We realised we needed to do that to keep some kind of chorus singers together. In terms of worship, I put together YouTube services. So people sent me in videos and I knitted them all together, and it took hours and hours and hours, as did recording all the music for it. And my husband's also a musician, so he helped out with that. So we sort of mucked it in and recorded everything, hymns and stuff. And we also did some virtual choir stuff, which not only took me hours to put together, but also took my singers hours to record apparently as well. I'm sure you have experience with that, but yeah, it was sort of, it dawned on me that hours and hours and hours that was spent, but it was really appreciated by the congregation. And our principal organist also sent in some fantastic voluntaries that he had on file, so that was great. So between everybody we managed to have some music. Later on it became untenable to put together these YouTube services, and we also wanted to all see each other on the screen beyond the social time, the coffee time that we had afterwards. So we had some Zoom Eucharist services as well, and Zoom Evensong also, and we had music from different families, so different musicians' homes. So we tried it that way, singing and playing, but it's varying sound quality, of course. So it wasn't quite as good quality, but it had a little bit more of an authentic live feel. The adult choir also had a WhatsApp group, which was it was nice to keep in contact with having some social interaction, and some to keep on top of the pastoral side of things. And I did send emails and tried to keep in touch with people that we hadn't heard from on the Zoom, and ringing people who don't have internet and that sort of thing in the choir. So tried to keep on top of that. And we also did some YouTube tutorials and some Zoom sessions for some community projects and some community singing virtual choir stuff as well. In September 2020, we carried on with Zoom rehearsals and then did also live singing in church. Pretty much, I think, with our full choir, but distance. I mean, what was left of, the people that felt that they could come to church. And in April 2021, we did an even further hybrid, of course, because we rehearsed in church with 6 singers. This for the adult choirs. Children's choirs, rules were different, weren't they? So we rehearsed 6 adults in the church, and then I zoomed in the rest of the choir via my phone. And we also rotated the singers in the services. So we had like a team of an SATB team of 6, and then we had like a soprano alto service, and then we had a bass service, and then we also then the next week we might have had a treble service. So we just tried to involve everybody rather than going, let's just have these 6 people singing now, and everybody else, we don't need you, kind of thing. It was trying to give, and everybody who wanted to sing in a small group had a turn. It wasn't ideal. Anyway, it wasn't ideal for anybody, was it? Really, none of it was ideal. So we also, I also established over the summer. Then I established a voluntary choir, which I don't think we've ever done before. I've never done it before, just for covering August. So it gave a chance for the choir to re-engage in a slightly bigger group, because we could do that, still with lots of distancing and everything like that. I'll talk about that a tiny bit later on. So I wanted to re-energize the choir. I wanted to encourage keen singers in the congregation. Perhaps some people off the back of that have joined the choir, or they've joined the all age music group. So it's kind of ignited people's enthusiasm for music and worship again, to try and rehabilitate voices, even for just congregational singing, that haven't sung for a long time, and just to create a bit more of an exciting musical worship experience, which is usually lacking over the summer when the choir take their break. Returned this week to rehearsals, and I'm going to be honest, our treble's a little bit thin on the ground. Like Hugh said, 18 months is such a long time, and all the effort, we put in so much effort to try and keep the rehearsals online. Of course, the children have been online all day at school, so it was, some of them dropped out that way because they didn't want to do more online stuff. So so it's been difficult. It's been really difficult. But we've decided, I will be doing recruitment in local schools, and schools where that's been it's been successful in the past. I will approach them again. I want to give them a little bit of space going back into the term, but I will be approaching local schools again. But we've also taken the opportunity to integrate the children's and adults choir a bit more, so that they're actually singing pretty much all of their services together, which they weren't before. The trebles work together with the adult sopranos, so nobody's getting ditched or anything. And the 2 choirs will support each other as they grow again. And probably will stick with that, because I think it will be really good. It's true that the pandemic has taken its toll on the choir numbers, but the resilient group who've stuck with it through various lockdowns, changing regulations, and my maternity leave are on such an enthusiastic and strong foundation with which to rebuild. The precautions we take. I was going to say about repertoire. I was initially cautious about introducing too many new pieces, but actually I think the singers are pretty up for it. So we're going to be putting a little bit of a smattering of new easy hymns and anthems amongst tried and tested old favourites. And that's our approach for now. We're singing socially distanced from the back of the church. It's a large parish church, All Saints. And we are making sure there's a gap between choir and congregation. We're wearing masks when we're inside the church, and we're not singing. And we're using good hand hygiene, and that's encouraged. And we're not letting one person be in an enclosed space like the choir vestry. so only one person at a time. And singers are asked to take a lateral flow test prior to coming to church because of singing without masks. So that's what we're doing currently, and that's what we did over August as well. And we're doing that in rehearsals and services, lateral flow applying to the services more. And over August, the congregation joined in just with the glory and the final hymn, and they're joining in pretty much with every congregational hymn now, but asked to keep their masks on. So we kind of gradually, rather than, and they're all distanced as well. They're all socially distanced, I should say. Everybody is distanced from each other. So we're sort of slowly kind of easing back in things like ideas like make the processional instrumental, so that the introduction, there's a long introduction and the procession can come up if that's what you do in your church. That's what we do. So we just let the procession go, and then the choir and congregation start singing, or you can have choir only for verse 1 and 2, which we did this morning, and the priests move, and then the congregation were invited to sing once the procession had passed. And same with the recessional, they could do it during the organ voluntary, for example, so they're not actually travelling into the aerosols of singing. So it's just a little idea. Music is such a big part of what we do at All Saints, so the vast majority of people were delighted to see the return of live music in the church, and there have been a handful of people who've expressed concern about singing at one time or another. We've tried to listen to people always and try to strike a balance between our precious choral music, which we love so much, and congregational singing, but making sure that as many people can feel safe to come to church. All morning services that we do are live streamed, and the church is purchasing a new sound system and live streaming equipment with mics and cameras. I'm so excited. It's an inevitability, but that has been accelerated because we've got into it. We've just had to be doing it, so we've been thrown in. So yeah, basically we've taken a look as well, a chance to look at the range of services we offer. So we're trialing a weekday choral evening evensong service through the autumn, which is really, really exciting. It's something that we've always wanted to do. And then our Sunday evensongs will take place more on feast days, which rather than like the second Sunday, the fourth Sunday of the month, it actually gives a bit more flexibility for our evenings. So yeah, we have made a few changes because of the pandemic. Sorry if I've talked for too long, but just want to give you a bit of context in how we work.
That's great. Thank you very much. And it's good to hear that so much is going on. I mean, I think what this reminds us of course, is for a long time during the pandemic, the choirs in their various forms were the only people who were doing the singing. So the congregations weren't allowed to at all. And then of course there were the ups and downs and the different guidance. It's all very, very, very hard to follow. But you've obviously navigated all that successfully and come out the other end, or are coming out the other end.
And the RSCM were really, really instrumental in that, in terms of providing that information, and also the template risk assessments from which to work, because it's just saved directors of music so much time and a headache, really. Yeah. And Hugh makes point, some congregations are still not singing yet, some churches are nervous. Hugh and Chris and others have also posted some more resources on the chat, so do look at that, everybody. But we'll move swiftly on, and I'll now ask Martin to say something. I was going to say, another parish church. If anybody's been to Romsey Abbey, you will know that it's kind of more a sort of young cathedral, really. It's a very large building, which I guess makes social distancing okay, but poses other challenge. Martin.
Yes, thank you. You're right in so much that since King Henry VIII did his stuff, we've actually been the parish church of Romsey. Last year we were meant to be celebrating our 900th year of that particular building, which was just for the abbess and the nuns. So there's been singing going on in that building by women, for sort of 900 years, and you can still see the footprint of the Saxon church that was there before that as well. So I came only about 18 months ago to Romsey, so I had a lot of plans in place with the local schools, all ready to do joint events, and then sort of COVID hit, so that all got completely sort of knocked on the head. So it's been an interesting introduction to being the director of music at the Abbey, certainly. At the Abbey itself, they'd actually been quite used to live streaming the service for a number of years. They used to do the morning service at least twice a month, if not more. So the tech on that side of things, we didn't have too much of a problem with. Not only the hardware, but the actual sort of team behind it, as a lot of the concerts at the Abbey would have been sort of live streamed with our own sort of stage being built, etc., by a crew. Similar in respects that although we were using YouTube or sometimes sort of Facebook Live, there was that element of people not really being totally involved. So some of the midweek services that the clergy did actually went on to Zoom, so there was at least that sort of little bit of interaction between the sort of congregation and ministers, and it's been a bit of a balancing act of what is appropriate and who do you let in and who do you not on occasions, as we have like other organizations being sort of Zoom bombed or something by sort of situations which you might not likely to want again. So we've mainly now sort of stuck to YouTube and the Facebook Live. During the lockdowns, when we were allowed to sing in small numbers, the choir certainly did. And again, we were just doing it on a rota with the back row mainly, and we're continuing to do a rota for the back row as well, although we are a very large building and the distance between the choir stalls is actually enormous. If you're distancing people out, singers out 2 meters, you soon use up that space, even put in extra chairs in between the choir stalls themselves. So during those breaks, we did get singing again. The lunchtime concerts also got going again in spits and spats, and then went into lockdown again. But there was a great want for people wanting live music, even if they couldn't actually sort of join in and sing. We're continuing a booking system, so people actually have to sort of book online to actually get their ticket, and the stewards are showing them to their seat at the beginning and out afterwards as well. And we are still using that for sort of weddings, funerals, and some of the Sunday services as well. One of the things that we found lately with the sort of the congregations now being allowed to be in the building on Sundays as well as other times of the week, congregation wise, like a lot of churches of our size and tradition, we tend to find that our congregations are middle sort of upper age limit, and not all of them are actually coming back. We've been sort of asking around why this might be, and it appears that some of them really have just got into the comfort zone of coming down in the morning in their pajamas, switching on the computer, and actually really enjoying being part of the worship online. So although missing out on that sort of social element with sort of meeting up with people physically in the building, they're still engaging with us. How we address that, on an ongoing basis, there's lots of discussions going on that side. People who do attend the Abbey are allowed to, once they're sat down, to remove their mask. They are requested to put their mask on if they're singing or moving around the building. Most of our choir, these sort of back row, are all sort of double jabbed now, and there is still an element of concern in some about making sure that all the trebles that we have do their sort of lateral flow test, etc., before coming for larger events that we may do. As you know, COVID hasn't gone away, and there's a couple of the seniors in the last week who have had a sort of a positive lateral flow and then a PCR test as well. So with the schools going back, we can't ignore that fact. That it's still around at the moment. Hopefully, if they carry on the vaccination program, with 12 to 18-year-olds, then that won't become so much of an issue. In helping the congregation to get singing again, which they're doing pretty much for all of the service, by now. We've done it in starts, just doing about 2 or 3 hymns, and now they're joining in with the Gloria and other things. Using the resources that we have in terms of the parish magazine, the Open Door. I sort of wrote an article about sort of vocal health and what you can do to start getting your singing voice back in trim, and not expecting absolutely everything to happen sort of first off. Plenty of warm-ups, plenty of sirening, and explaining the reasons behind that, just not so that it's it's some sort of daft idea. And they are really enjoying singing, I have to say. They are making a goodly sound, even with masks in the Abbey. So that's been really pleasing. We started a informal worship, weekly informal worship service just before the very first lockdown. We had about 3 weeks, and this was with a worship band. So all of that has sort of slightly got put on hold. But we've now, since we were allowed to sing outside about 4 or 5 months ago, the Abbey Vine service has restarted, but being outside. So we're allowing them to being able to sing and enjoy the fellowship. And it's more like an outside house group, if anything. It's sort of grown in a slightly different fashion that we were expecting. Eventually, obviously, in the autumn, when the weather closes in a bit, it'll come inside the Abbey, and that sort of dynamic will change a bit as well. There's been obviously very difficulty in recruiting for choirs. As Emma was saying, sometimes we found people have been zoomed out, and haven't wanted to sort of engage. I know some of our local youth choirs, it became more of a social activity and just a way of keeping them on board necessarily, rather than learning lots of new music. However, there is an opportunity at the moment with lockdowns and the children go back to the schools. Parents are reassessing what activities their children are doing. Well, are they going to do the same thing as they were before? Is the days staying the same, or the timing staying the same? And I've had about, I think it's 6 senior girls come and join us within about the last month or so, and that I've never had before, purely because we've done a little bit of advertising, not hugely over the top. Although it was nice, I got a video up a couple of days ago of one of our choir parents saying what the benefits of being a chorister was at the Abbey, and John Rutter even actually posted a comment saying, great opportunity, can I come and join? As well as another nice comment, so we can use that to our advantage in our recruiting the schools as well. So we've managed to hold things together. There's lots more to do, and it almost feels like sort of 2021, where we are now, is getting things going again from where I started almost 2 years ago. So it's going to be an interesting time, but we have got the congregation back singing. We have got the choirs back singing. So that's where we're at Romsey Abbey.
Thank you for that. Well, obviously opportunities as well with this sort of reassessment that's going on. Interesting point about retraining the congregation to sing as well. I mean, I think many people will have noticed that they're a bit creaky, as it were, from not having sung much, because that's where people, by and large, most people do their singing, if they do any singing, if they're not in the choir. Tricia, can I move on to you? And sorry, Roy, we'll come to you last, but hopefully you'll have had a chance to finish your lunch. Tricia.
Hello, thank you, Jonathan, and hello, everyone. If my fellow panel members represent the finest traditions of cathedral and large urban parishes, I'm here to speak for the little rural parishes, for whom the resources of the cathedrals and the parishes, the things you've already mentioned, multiple organists, for example, are unimaginable luxuries. I'm the Director of Music for the United Parishes of East and West Harptree with Hinton Blewett, which really is as rural as it sounds. We're in the Chew Valley in Somerset, and the 3 villages have a combined population of fewer than 1,400 people. They are served by 3 medieval churches, 3 excellent pubs, no Wi-Fi whatsoever, and scant mobile signal, and a single church choir of around 25 singers, ranging in age from 10 to well over 80. Pre-COVID, we provided hymns and an anthem for all but one Sunday morning service per month, plus a monthly choral evensong. From the start of the first lockdown, we transferred our weekly choir practices onto Zoom, missing only the rehearsal in that first week, and became for many members an essential beacon of normality and social contact. We managed to persuade enough choristers to grapple, and I'm talking about 80-year-old choristers here, just for clarity, choristers to grapple with the technology. I'd like to make a public thank you to the collective grandchildren of the Chew Valley for technology in this regard, to have a remotely recorded anthem for Easter Day 2020, which became the first of many such efforts through lockdown. All our church services from the 22nd of March 2020 until the end of June 21 have been recorded and broadcast as podcasts due to the inability to stream, with myself providing the hymns, both organ and voice, enhanced by further remotely recorded anthems for the major festivals and feast days. Monthly evensongs were broadcast from a combination of remotely recorded ferial praises and responses and old recordings of the choir for canticles and anthems and the like. There are, as I said, no live streaming options available for us at all. Once a month, our verger, who happens to be a retired BBC sound engineer, which has come in very handy, I have to say, produced a praise service, which is continuing as a podcast, which is now transferred to a weekly podcast. We don't have facilities for a worship band or anything like that. In May this year, we ventured back to real, live and COVID-safe rehearsals in the churchyard and recorded a complete evensong there, which included significant contributions from the local fauna. Bumblebees sound like Lancaster bombers as they go past a mic, by the way, if you're ever thinking of doing that. After our usual summer break in August, we're now back inside, and we had our first rehearsal on Wednesday evening this week, and this morning was the first morning service with robed choir since March 2020. And this evening we have our first live choral evensong, which I'm very much looking forward to. We have a full risk assessment in place. Again, I'd just like to say a huge thank you for RSCM and ABCD for producing wonderful risk assessment templates for us all to use. It's saved so much time and given a lot of reassurance to parishes. So we have our full risk assessments in place, and choir members, as others have said, are asked to do lateral flow tests before rehearsals and services. I'm also using the Well Rehearsed app. There's a quick advert for that, which I've been doing since it launched. And despite relatively high numbers in our area, we have yet to have a single positive case from the choir, within the choir at all. So what have we learnt from the past 18 months or so? That the choir in a parish like ours is an enormously important part of the lives of its members. It goes way beyond music. That the absence of live music from services has actually given our congregations a keen awareness of the contribution the choir makes and how much they've missed it. That we can learn new skills, however old we are. And that we desperately want to keep traditional church choral music alive. But this comes with a bit of a caveat. I took the opportunity of asking my choir members for their thoughts for this session that I could sort of feed into the conversation. And they spoke of feeling that the music and style of worship that they love is under threat as never before. They feel that the Anglican Church, with its focus on lay-led worship, is threatening the very existence of traditional choral music. We currently have an interregnum in our parish which began in October 2020, which is the worst possible time, I suppose. And both the choir and I are feeling the lack of a priest in charge very keenly. We have visiting priests for a Sunday morning service. That's it. That's all we have. The choir are enormously proud of what they've achieved through COVID, but not half as proud as I am of them, because they've absolutely picked it up and run with it. And are sounding great as well. But they are incredibly fearful of the future. Our congregation is singing with masks, and we're introducing more and more of the sung parts of our usual service. We're up to the Sanctus Benedictus and the Agnus Dei. We felt the Gloria was a step too far this morning, but we'll warm them up to that. the congregation are all singing the hymns with masks. Our medieval churches were never designed with social distancing in mind, shall we say. And I think the maximum capacity of the smallest of my 3 churches at 2 metre social distancing, we worked out at 12 people, including the priest, due to the layout. It's absolutely impossible. So we're getting started very, very gently. We also have seen very low numbers today, extremely low numbers. That's pretty normal for our parish in that most of the congregation are retired. And so, as in most rural parishes, there are 2 times of year where you see a significant drop-off of both congregation and choir people turning up. One is May and June, because that's haymaking for those of you in cities. So all the farmers disappear. Lambing's a bit of an issue in my choir. I've got a couple of farmers who do lambing. So that sort of time, sort of February time, is always a bit dodgy. But May, June, haymaking, nightmare. And September, of course, is when they go, the kids are all back at school, I'll go on my holidays. So we have quite a dip in our congregations at the moment, which will pick up. I have noticed that because our services have been on podcasts and we've reached an international audience, unbelievably, with our podcasts, the services have become more informal, and the informality has carried over into the live services. So, for example, we suddenly noticed this morning that nobody stood up when the priest came in and entered. They all just stayed sitting down. They've lost that sort of habit. They've lost the habit of what to do in services. And it's going to be an interesting conversation where we have an interregnum, so we do not have a priest to take the lead on that. As to how that goes, there was talk of mergers with other parishes. It's all very unsettling. So I feel, from my perspective, we're at a pivotal moment for tiny parishes with very elderly congregations and elderly choir members. I'm really interested to hear how other people are coping with that, and really ideas for how to keep my choir, who've done miracles over lockdown and have really stuck together and worked incredibly hard to make it all happen, how we can take that now and put it into the new normal and thrive in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Tricia. Well, I mean, obviously, lots of encouragement there, but also concerns for the future and so on. But so we'll open it up in a minute. But sorry, Roy, you've been very patient, but we'll turn to you now. Thank you.
Hello, I've just unmuted. I hope you can all hear me.
Yep.
And I've put my stopwatch on 5 minutes, and I'll start now and see how well I do. I'll do my best. Right, so I'm a vicar choral at St Paul's Cathedral, but I also run 2 amateur choral societies, and so I've got a bit of a mixed perspective on this. At St Paul's, well, St Paul's Cathedral was designed with social distancing in mind. Oddly enough, actually, really specifically, the individual bays that the priests sing in, which is where the Vicars Choral went to during the lockdown, are exactly 2 meters apart. So that that fulfilled its a particular job very, very nicely. But the cathedral's reaction to lockdown has evolved from an initial reaction that would have unintentionally resulted in the almost complete abolition of the choir to a realisation that the choral foundation is actually at the heart of everything the cathedral does. We went through periods where there was no music, nobody was allowed to enter the cathedral. We went through periods where we had services with a single cantor. We went through periods where we were singing in small groups of 3 and then small groups of 6. And eventually we have now worked our way back to as close to normality as one can hope for under the circumstances. I was personally responsible for the audio and visual output of the cathedral music during lockdown. And that was a very steep learning curve, but it was all produced with existingly owned domestic technology. We just realized that we actually had all of the kit that we needed to be able to pre-record an entire program of music. So, for example, we did Holy Week entirely using camera equipment owned by Vicars Choral, computer equipment owned by the Cathedral and other Vicars Choral, and software that was free. So it was actually a godsend, if you'll excuse the pun. Streaming is an obvious, is something that's obviously come of age, if you like, during this period, and it's the way forwards in many ways. It's not something that's going to go away, and a conversation needs to be had and has been had amongst the professional cathedral singing fraternity, if you like, as to what happens with the rights. People need to understand the rights of performances with regard to streaming. It's very, very easy to simply suggest that you put the cameras and the sound equipment in place and everything else sorts itself out. Every single singer, whether they're paid or not, has a right of their own performance, and those need to be sorted. And we do actually have a document which has been several the lay clerks have come together over a number of meetings and have produced a document which I will share with everybody after I finish talking and put it down into the document section of this Zoom chat. Our precautions are still in place at St Paul's. The precautions, congregations are still wearing masks and are by and large socially distanced, and by and large they're not engaging in hymnody. We are still socially distanced while singing, but we are now processing while singing, and numbers, we have to admit, are still down. But today was a glorious day, so I would imagine that numbers would have been down today at St Paul's Cathedral anyway. Changes in the environment as a result, and what is our new normal? Well, slightly depressingly actually, things are returning to pre-COVID normality, and are by and large ignoring many of the advantages of social distancing, certainly from the point of view of singing in that building. I think we sang with a deal greater attention on visual clues from the conductor, because we were socially distanced and we couldn't rely on the wall of sound that we could hear and responding to that so much. And I certainly found that with my own choirs, that when we gave performances socially distanced, people needed to step up to the plate and realise that they really did need to watch. They couldn't rely on what they were hearing anymore. And unfortunately, with the lack of social distancing now, and with us coming together into more of a group, that can be seen to disappear. And I'm certainly feeling that we're slightly less responsive to dynamics, for example, as a result. Also, the return of hymnody is welcomed with various degrees of enthusiasm, depending on whom you speak to. Within my own choirs, we managed to use technology like other choirs to produce virtual choral material, and we rose to the challenge from that point of view, because we were able to produce stuff that actually achieved national radio airplay in some cases, which is something that we would never have done if it hadn't been for lockdown. So in many ways, we managed to achieve things that would have otherwise just been a pipe dream. I'm also writing a piece in celebration of the return to choral singing. If you're interested, I'm writing it even if you're not. Song Rushes In, it's called, and it's got a libretto by Ewan Tate, who's written an absolutely brilliant set of lyrics. It was originally written for the 50th anniversary of one of my choirs, and I was dreading the idea because, simply because how do you go about writing a piece that isn't just self-congratulatory? But because of lockdown and because of the pandemic, the return of choral singing has become an issue of greater importance than ever before. And so it's something worth commemorating, but also to remember the careers of choristers that were cut short as a result. My daughter was one of them. Her final year at Salisbury Cathedral, she missed out on many, many, many concerts and performances. And so an element of that piece is to commemorate those careers of senior choristers who were due to blossom to a leadership role within the choir and had that snatched away. A learning experience. I got to learn how my choral singers really valued their choirs, much more than I would have estimated, actually. The mental health benefits of a regular meeting, but also the thing that we got to learn was that the technology that we used to see us through the pandemic is actually of benefit and shouldn't necessarily be thrown out now. So I really remember the first time my choir assembled after many months of learning music on with Zoom rehearsals, which I mean, it was a learning curve for me as well, because I had to learn how to present a television program essentially instead of running a choir rehearsal. The first rehearsal back, and we sang music that the choir would never have been able to sight read, and we got it right first time. And the looks on everybody's faces, we all agreed we mustn't go back to the way things were, where we spent months and months singing to varying levels of sight reading ability. So that is something that we hope to be able to take on board and continue using. It's worth bearing in mind, I think, and this is my last comment, and I've overrun by 3 minutes, sorry, is that if the pandemic had happened even 10 years earlier, none of the technology that saw us through would have been available to us, and we would have been completely lost.
Good, thank you. Yes, I mean, I think that's when I think we've all thought back, gosh, what if it had been 10, 20 years back, and how very different it would have been. Thank you for that. There have obviously been quite a lot of comments, and particularly things about repertoire, which are on the chat, which will be saved. And you can save, if you want those, you can also save it for yourself. So that's good. We obviously are running up towards the time when the session should end, but and we've obviously had comments as we went along, but can I invite any others who would like to add comments from their own perspective or questions to our panel? I thought the point about rights was very interesting, incidentally, and of course that relates not only to the performers, but also in some cases to the music. Obviously there's CCLI and so on for some of the church music, but not, if you're doing a concert, of course that doesn't apply. So we did have a webinar on that, didn't we, Rachel?
We did, yes, and actually we're planning to follow up on that, not least because the licensing regulations keep changing and that they're trying to adapt. And so we're planning to revisit that in the autumn, I think. So yeah. Watch this space.
Yeah, and I think the point that came out from a number of the comments was, not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, as it were, in terms of just going back to what we were doing before, but using the best of most forward-looking of what we've been able to do during lockdown and all the upheavals. I mean, I know we have with us I can sort of see a number of people many of whom I know are involved in church music in their own churches. So I wondered if the others have comments or questions they would like to raise. Can't actually see everybody at the moment. Let me just go back to, there we are. Hugh wanted to. You've got a hand up.
Yeah, Jonathan, not to preempt, stop other people coming in, but I was just thinking about something Tricia said about her, where do you go next with the choir, and this sort of landscape of who knows what's happening in a small parish and all of the challenges with that. The key word that I think that you mentioned is community, isn't it? And that came up in what Emma was talking about, I think, elsewhere, and also actually it's just a word that noticeably comes up as I think a key thing. And I think where there's creative possibility is actually about using the choir as a bridge to be able to connect that group of people together where they are, and actually helping the church recognise that the music that's offered by the choir isn't some you know, sort of 3 feet to the left of what the church should be doing, that actually, well, and Roy was saying, you know, St Paul's have realised, and blimey, if St Paul's have realised that, maybe music's quite important to us, then if you scale it down slightly to a church in Somerset, then actually I think that's quite significant, isn't it? Because actually, if the church recognises that the music is not the be-all and end-all, it is not about the music, it is about what the music enables, then you've got a really interesting set of possibilities to come in. And of course, it's also worth, and it might be that Tricia's can have an interesting conversation with Emma, because after all, Emma's job title sort of encapsulates that, because she's not simply a director of music. And that's, I suspect, on the part of you of Emma's church, not an accident.
Yeah, Emma, I don't know whether you want to say something about your sort of the place of that, your work in the community with the, you talked about also schools and so on, and recruitment.
Yeah, so we do try and link with local schools, and we offer occasional opportunities to come into the church and perform, be it for a civic carol service or something like that. We would have a massed primary school choir, or if we are perhaps doing a fundraising concert, we might bring primary schools in together, you know, give the music to the music coordinator at the school, and then I get them to learn it, and I go into the schools and go, oh, you're doing a fantastic job, just do this, maybe just do that, and let's just check this note and that sort of thing. And then I bring them all together and I would conduct them, and then obviously, you know, that's a wonderful experience in itself, and they've come into the church and they've had a lovely experience singing. And then obviously off the back of that, you can always say, well, if you've enjoyed this, you might come join our choir. So it's a recruitment thing, but I think also it must be acknowledged that that's a fantastic thing to happen in that child's life, even if their parent or guardian then just says, oh no, you can't do a Wednesday night, you know, you've got swimming, sort of thing. Actually, that happened, and that they had a good experience in an Anglican church or whatever, do you know what I mean? They had a nice experience, and they learned also that the church is there for them. It's not actually just there for, it's not there even just for the congregation, it's not there just for the priests, it's not just there for the choir, that sort of thing, the bell ringers, it's there for the whole community, and that's what we're trying to do across our sort of organisation, but with music as a big figurehead for that. So, you know, it's about trying to get link up with other organisations, like I was saying about the linking up with the local drop-in centre for the homeless, and rather than going, we want to do this, we went to them and said, what do you need, what would you like? We used to have somebody come in from the grammar school and do a choir, should we come and do that? You know, so we then did a bit of a singing group there. So I think rather than, I think talk to your local organisations. Yeah. That would be my top.
So there are opportunities for sort of kind of reboot, as it were, as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Tricia, I think this will probably have to be our last sort of main intervention, actually, as the time is moving on. But
just to say that the highlight of last year was actually the village a service of 6 lessons and carols, which was all done as a podcast, included the choir doing remote recorded things. It also included remotely recorded congregational carols, which took some persuading, but we managed it. And also the local school was very badly affected by COVID, not least the head of the one school that we have in the parish, which is a small primary school. The headmistress developed COVID very early on, and has been suffering from long COVID ever since. So they've been without a head. They don't have a music coordinator, but we still managed to get the entire school, class by class, to record a carol, which was one of the carols. And it was the highlight of their year. It was the only musical thing they managed. And I'm desperate to build on that now that they've got a new head coming in.
Brilliant. Yeah. Number of people have mentioned pieces for the sort of return, as it were, which is I think it is great to celebrate that. And I think the other point to emerge from the last few comments, particularly, is the importance of engaging with the community as much as re-engaging with the congregation and the church itself. Obviously, the communities vary hugely, but I think that's been very important. I think we need to draw this to a close now, don't we, Rachel, so people can get their tea in preparation for the final session, final plenary on the choral landscape of the future, which is at 4 o'clock. So I'd like to thank all the members of the panel for their contributions, and obviously all the comments and points that have been made on the chat as well. I'd like to wish everybody well in their church and community music making going forward. I think we're all it's a mixture of trepidation and excitement that we're all feeling at the moment about this. So